We called ourselves border rats. Snowcap, we were trained by Army Special Forces, the SEALs, the Marines, and we would go down to the source countries, Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru, which is the three countries where most of the coke was coming from. There was another informant involved running around in Mexico at the time. They gave us the tip, and we knew what his function was. He was a broker. He was a Colombian broker representing both the Colombians and Mexicans, the kingpins, and he's the one that provided a tip. This was on the heels of Camarena's February 1985 abduction, brutal interrogation and murder. In that era, I'm talking the 80s, we did have authority from our own people. It was kind of like the frontier days. It was the cowboy days. There was, we trust you guys, you're big boys, gun and badges, the whole 9 yards, go on down and do the Lord's work. In Mexico, everything was gray. And that was in the 80s. Wow. Come all the way here to 2025, guess what? We're still in the gray. Mexico has a lot of laws on the books, but some are meant to be followed, some are meant to never be followed, some are just for looks, but it's always gray.
Welcome, everyone, to Truth Nation. I don't know what number podcast this is. I should have asked Anthony before we started, but we're getting up there. Chief, how are you today, sir?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
The Chief, Mark Garrett, retired Chief, California Highway Patrol, good enough to join me today, as always. And Mark, we have a special guest today, Mike Chavarria. Mike wrote, well, first of all, Mike, I know Mike through his work at DEA. Mike was probably, I guess you would say, like a generation before me at DEA, believe it or not. Somehow, I'm just looking at the two of us here. I feel like I look older than him, and somehow when I was in high school, he was already a DEA agent. But somehow that happened, and we find ourselves, here today talking to each other. But he wrote an incredible book, Mark, and I got to be honest with you. When I first read it, Mark, my first thought was, this is amazing. This is a great book. It's an incredible story. But then I said to myself, I had to kind of catch myself, and I said, hey, am I saying that because I know Mike a little bit? We never worked directly together, but we knew each other. My group, when he was assigned to Mexico, the group that I was leading, they had a lot of interaction with him and his people. And I said, do I find this so good and so interesting because I know a lot of the people involved, a lot of the characters in the story, I know them, and I know the background, and I know the DEA stuff. So what I did is I sent it to you as the voice of reason, and you gave it a read. And Mark, give me, if you recall, well, tell me what you thought of the story when you read it, not being, a DEA agent and having background on drugs really at all.
I called you about, Bill, probably about 100 pages into the manuscript. And I called you because it was such, and we'll get into it. Obviously, there's tragedy here and suspense and, just real life trauma. But it was such an enjoyable read because of the authenticity. When I read that book, I felt like I was listening to cops in their natural environment. And it was just so authentic. And the funny thing is, like I said, 30 years California Highway Patrol and DUI versus DEA versus drugs, things like that. But the interesting thing was to talk about cult culture. When you talk about bureaucracy, and when you talk about rivalries, when you talk about miscommunication, resources, it's common through all law enforcement, and that's why it was such a good read from my point of view. It was excellent, by the way, for anybody. But if you are a cop, man, you can relate to this no matter what capacity you served in.
Yeah. And by the way, I should have said the name of the book up front. It's called Junior, a Son of the Golf Cartel. And, I think I took a quote from the beginning of the book, and I think this was Mike's quote, and he'll correct me if it was someone else. It says, this isn't your typical drug trafficker story of good guys versus bad guys where good triumphs. And I agree with that 100%. I mean, I could argue that it's just a story of human relationships for the good and for the bad, meaning that I think Mike also said this, it's not a DEA fairy tale. It's a real world international narcotics investigation with interagency synergies when things go right and interagency squabbles when they don't go right. And really, everything in this book is personality driven. And there's a lot of ego. And you know, we see that in law enforcement a lot. So, Mike, again, thanks for taking the time to come talk about this book. It's an amazing story. And before we really get into the story and start talking about what in essence is almost like an unauthorized biography of Junior, you know, the central character in the book, from your point of view, let's talk about you and how you found yourself, you know, after a 30+ year career of DEA, you know, putting pen to paper and writing stories, writing a story like this one. You know, where did you grow up, and kind of what was your life experience that made you want to get into DEA, and how did you find yourself a DEA agent?
Well, thank you. First of all, I really appreciate being invited onto your show, and I think the subject matter is worthwhile. Of course, you know, I wrote the story. It was a work of passion. At first, it was there was a lot of anger in it. I had to edit and re-edit and re-edit and just calm my voice down. And after talking to a number of authors, I got some really good advice. He said, Mike, tell the story as Junior would want you to tell it. And so, you know, I channeled him. I channeled his voice. I had a lot of interaction with him from the moment we first met. But how I got there, how I met him, you know, is kind of an interesting story in and of itself. So where did I grow up? I grew up in San Diego, and part of San Diego, central San Diego, called Linda Vista. Linda Vista in the 70s became known as Little Vietnam after, you know, it was a point where all the refugees came after Saigon fell. And that's where I grew up. My world was relatively small. My folks were fairly uneducated, but they were wholesome, and they were patriots, and they believed that the government was something to aspire to, you know, to be involved with. So, although I have 6 half sisters, both my mom and my dad were married previously. My dad was born and raised in Costa Rica. His trade was a commercial fisherman. My mother, first generation, born and raised in San Francisco, but her folks came from elsewhere. Her father was from Canada. But I was raised, I went to high school, graduated, went to college. I knew I was going to be one of two things, or both. I was going to go in the military, or I was going to be a police officer. And at some point in time,
And Mike, how did you know that? Like, was it from, you know, was it from TV? Was it did you know someone, like a family friend that was in that line of work, or how did you? What was the exposure that caused you to just kind of know that right away?
Well, my brother and I used to watch shows, police shows, military shows. One of our favorite shows was Combat with Vic Morrow. I mean,
Vic Morrow.
I'm aging myself here. So we would watch a show, run out with our toy M16s, and you know, and play with all the other neighborhood kids. We were always the Americans, of course, but I grew up watching TV, and then you know, police shows, Adam 12. My favorite story was a Police Story. And then, you know, I started getting into police stuff. I started reading Joseph Wamba, Choir Practice, you know. I was so I just fell in love with the whole environment, and you know, we wanted an exciting life. And like I said, you know, government service was promoted in our home. So while I was going through college, I think I came across a naval recruiter, and we started talking about, you know, being a pilot, and I could potentially be a pilot. I mean, I thought, wow, I could be a pilot. I thought those were people that were, were born and raised in a whole different environment. So I thought I could go in the Navy with a college degree and become a pilot. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to do a career in the military, but flying jets off a carrier, I mean, that's pretty cool. So I went into the Navy after passing a test. I went through Aviation Officer Candidate School in Pensacola, Florida. Got my head shaved, yelled at by a Marine Corps drill instructor. Um, you know, had encountered some of the funniest moments ever. The Marine Corps drill instructors, they can't be trained to do that. That's a natural gift to be able to jump somebody and to jump down somebody's throat. Um, anyway, I did that, and then I started flight school. I got my commission. I started flight school, and then I was what they call NPQ, not physically qualified to continue. After I started flying, they give you a head to toe test on your birthday, and my eyesight had diminished. So that was in the early 80s. They said you can either sit in the back seat, go on a ship, or you can get out and keep your reserve commission and drill on the weekends. So I said, I think I'll get out. So in the process of getting out, I encountered Naval Investigative Service at that time. Today it's NCIS, and I enjoyed it. I thought, oh, this is they were special agents, 1811s, gun carrying federal agents. So I saw what they did. I enjoyed it. They told me to put an application in. I did. I moved back to San Diego after I exited the Navy, and then I got the job. I got the job in San Diego and started working NIS out of the San Diego Naval Station, where all of our ships are parked.
And how long were you at NIS?
A year and a half.
Okay. And what kind of stuff were you doing there? Because it's interesting. I know other DEA agents who came through that same route.
Yeah.
One of them was my roommate, as a matter of fact, for a while. So it's not that uncommon. And I'm just wondering, what was there drug stuff that you got involved in, or?
Yeah, a lot. That was my thing.
Okay.
I liked doing undercover, and I did both undercover on the base, but mostly off the base, working with narcotics task force guys and DEA.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched what they did. I talked to them. We made friends, and they said, "Hey, if you like working drugs so much, why don't you come on board?" And so I put my application in. First time around, they said, "You just don't have enough investigative experience." So I waited a little bit, put another application in, and I spoke Spanish. So I was hungry for it. I kept at it, and then I finally got hired. My recruiter was Gus Vasquez. He was an agent out of Chicago, got shot during an undercover deal. He basically mentored me and convinced me to keep at it, that eventually I'd get hired. I did. So the end of it, 1985, I was, on board, and then immediately went to the academy. I was in BA 42. It's like the third class
at Quantico, right?
At Quantico,
yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
So, how long did that whole process take back then? The whole DEA hiring process.
They were hiring about a year.
That's pretty quick, really. Yeah, that's not bad.
About a year. Yeah.
So you're working for DEA. You find yourself in Calexico, if I'm not mistaken, right? So that's a California border town. What was it like working there as a new agent at that time?
It felt like a foreign post. We had no representation on the Mexican side of the borders, from San Diego all the way to Brownsville. All of our offices were either consulate or embassy in the interior of Mexico. So the guys on the border, we called ourselves border rats, or somebody gave us that nickname. I don't know, but we were border rats. We would cross into Mexico whether it was to eat tacos or run around with the Mex feds, kicking doors and seizing dope, and so that was pretty wild. I had never whatever we did in the academy, in that sanitized environment,
Yeah.
did not prepare me for what I was about to encounter in Mexico. And they told us, "Hey, we want you guys to come, and we want you to bring your guns down and do everything we do."
And Mike, when you say they, you're talking about the Mexican
The Mexican
authorities.
federales. Yeah.
So I got to interrupt because this is fascinating. So when you said you'd go over to eat tacos or kick doors in with the federales, was this official, so to speak, or was this kind of like on the fly? Hey, we got a call. Let's go down there. Was there any type of jurisdictional issues as far as in other words, authority from the U.S. government to be down there? How did that all work?
So in that era, I'm talking the 80s,
Hmm.
um, it was we did have authority from our own people. So you guys on the border, as long as we know what you're doing, you're free and clear to go down. It was kind of like the frontier days. It was the cowboy
Hmm.
days. There was, we trust you guys. You're big boys, gun and badges, the whole 9 yards. Go on down and do the Lord's work. In Mexico, everything was gray, and that was in the 80s.
Wow.
Come all the
Wow.
way here to 2025. Guess what? We're still in the gray.
Hmm.
Mexico has a lot of laws on the books, but they're some are meant to be followed, some are meant to never be followed, some are just for looks, but it's always gray. Well, so we would cross over. Well, I'll give you a typical case. We were on the border, so we were doing the interdiction stuff, right, along with the legacy customs and immigration. So a truckload of weed, for example, would come across and get stopped secondary, and they put a dog on it. They'd hit it, they'd find it, and they determined that the defendant or defendants did not have any ties to the United States. It means they were non-residents,
Hmm.
right? That was a green light to call the U.S. Attorney's Office, get a declination for prosecution, and call the Mex Feds and have them meet us at the port of entry. We would, basically turn them over to the Mex Feds and send them back down to Mexico, and then we go down with them and follow the investigation wherever it went. One funny story, and I'm a GS 9 because I came over from NIS, so I was still a rookie, obviously, with DEA, but we're in the holding cell with one of the defendants. Now, this defendant happened to be a state judicial police officer.
Hmm.
All right. We call the Mexicans, the Mex Feds. They come over and they recognize him. And I could see the guy recognize our Mex Fed friends. So he starts to stand up, and one of the Mex Feds comes up to him and whack. So we're looking around. We had, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're still in the United States. What the
Whoa.
fuck are you doing?
Right.
So, that quickly ended. We get him back to Mexico, and they do their thing, and behind closed doors. We're not deaf. We didn't see what was going on, but we're not deaf. So we hear
I was
what's
going to ask you
going
about the human rights side of
Yeah.
that, like how all that worked in the 80s.
on. Probably the same way it works today.
Right.
Wet towels, buckets of water, cattle prods. There's all sorts of fancy tricks that they like to use that are very, very effective. We never, obviously that was a no for us, but it's their country.
Hmm.
They did what they do. Now, this was on the heels of Camarena's 1985, February 1985 abduction, brutal interrogation and murder. So, that was fresh in everybody's mind, not just in our minds on the border, but DEA as well. So they were very cautious. And then shortly after I got to Calexico, Victor Cortez was snatched up by the Mexican state police in Guadalajara. I think he was meeting with an informant outside of a bowling alley, and he was profiled, or the informant was profiled. Anyway, they roll in, grab him. He doesn't have any ID on him. They take him to the station, and he's telling them I think they found some guns in the informant's vehicle. They get him to the station, and he's telling them, I work with DEA, U.S. consulate. Here's the phone number, call and verify my employment, blah, 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 blah. Instead, what they did was they tuned him up for 6 to 8 hours, brutally, using the things that I just described. And he suffered some broken bones, I think some broken ribs. I don't know about his nose, but they were very effective at working the midsection to avoid, obvious facial injury. But he got worked over really well. And thanks to our agents in Guadalajara, who went to not only our own ambassador, who then went to the governor, Jalisco governor, they got involved and found out where he was and saved the day.
Mm.
But he was potentially going down that same
route, huh?
road, because
Right.
during the Camarena thing, it was revealed, and I'm just going to plug one of my favorite authors right now, Elaine Shannon.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote The Desperados. It was all about the circumstances that led up to and surrounding the Camarena's abduction,
Mm-hmm.
and how involved the police were at all levels,
Yeah.
local, state, federal, and the politicians.
Yep.
It went all the way to the top. And see, that's the thing, that having been in Mexico and having been mentored by the right people, encountering the right sources, I learned that it's not the individual that we're looking for to link arms with and go down there and solve the drug war or fight the drug war. It is a system that we're battling. And no matter who we encounter at the upper echelon levels of the government, they're just giving us lip service because they're part of the very system that is never going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because now we're talking drugs. We're talking the most lucrative industry in the world.
Yep.
Anyway, I don't know. I didn't mean to get us off the track.
No, it's fascinating stuff, Mike. And I think in the case of Victor Cortez, probably the resolve that the American government had after the Camarena kidnapping probably saved his life, because then they were able to, there was no time delay. You know what I mean? There was no time delay about getting action taken, and the Mexican government didn't really want a repeat of what had happened.
Exactly.
We didn't want a repeat, of course, and they also did not want a repeat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he went out for years. His, the memory and his legacy, I think, has kept us safe for many, many years.
Yep.
Today is a different era.
Yeah.
Today,
Yeah.
I like to refer to them as PlayStation drug traffickers.
Young traffickers that are, social media influencers and traffickers at the same time, and it's a whole different game.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mike, after Calexico, or one of the assignments that you had was Operation Snowcap. And could you just explain real briefly what that was?
So Snowcap was a multi-agency Department of Justice, Department of Defense, various agencies, from elite Border Patrol agents, they call them BORTAC, tactical team of the Border Patrol, Coast Guard elements. We were trained by Army Special Forces, the SEALs, the Marines, and we would go down to the source countries, Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru, which is the three countries where most of the coke was coming from. Obviously, the brain center was in Colombia, but like the Peruvians and the Bolivians were working for the Colombians. But we would train in military fashion and given resources and told to go down to these countries with elements of the military, whether they be mostly special forces, army guys, and we would go down and do 90-day tours in like imagine a mash camp. So we'd set up our own little mash camp, and we would go out and recruit informants, debrief them, figure out where the labs were, where the airstrips were, where the planes were coming in to pick up loads of whether it was cocaine base or cocaine hydrochloride. And we were trying to stop the cocaine at its source. And the early days that preceded Snowcap, which was started, I think, in 87, 86, 87, was another operation called Blast Furnace. And at that time, the labs, the cocaine hydrochloride labs, were closer into civilized areas, towns, still in the jungle, but not that difficult to find. Blast furnace guys started hitting lab after lab after lab, pushed the labs out further into the jungle towards the Brazilian border. So by the time Snowcap came around, and a lot of it was a volunteer program, and of course they sought Spanish speakers, but we would go down groups of 10, 15 guys together with Bortac, Border Patrol, Coast Guard, and we would look for cocaine sulfate labs, which were called pozos, which is the very first process, taking the leaves, adding chemicals, and mixing something to produce sulfate. That sulfate would be turned into a cocaine base. That base, which is still used, would be sent to either Colombia or a remote lab in Bolivia, and same thing in Peru, and used to produce hydrochloride, which is what you see in the kilo packages in the United States at the finished, when they get to market.
Yeah, and I'm always, anybody that worked that operation, I mean, you guys went through some type of like abbreviated ranger school, right, at Fort Benning to go there?
A lot of guys, I missed the ranger training. However, I went to the Special Forces training, 30-day training in Panama.
Okay.
It was normally run by the regular Army Jungle Operation Training Center in Fort Sherman. They had, since we were working with them already, a group of Special Forces guys that would teach that training. So we spent 30 days running around Panama. And that is when I started to get over my fear of snakes. And
Yeah.
a lot of them. There were a lot of
So,
them.
yeah, I usually ask people that work Snowcap to tell me their best story of blowing up a lab when they knowingly used too much C4 or whatever to blow the lab up. But I don't know if you had such an experience or was it just snakes with you?
No, it was both. But I
Okay.
avoided the C4 issue because I had been told by wise men who came before me. They said, "Run like hell."
Right.
And so I did. I was, in good shape, and I got the hell away, far away before, the big boom. But I have some photographs with the fire in the background. So,
Right.
Nice.
Yeah.
and so we'd blow up airstrips as well, because it was just a menace. The aircraft. I mean, some operations that I went on, we came within an hour. We would hike from about 11 at night to about 5 in the morning, trying to, to get to a remote runway that would accommodate these twin engine aircraft that would come in and pick up large loads of base and transport it out to jungle sites going towards the Brazilian border. And we just missed a couple of them. Some of our guys were lucky and caught the planes coming in and shot them up. I mean, didn't kill the pilots, but kept the plane from taking off.
Yeah.
But it was an experience. I did that and volunteered for that operation just to see if foreign assignments were going to be something I would I would be interested in, and it piqued my interest.
And so from there, you went to Bolivia, which I guess is kind of a natural fit, right? You were working down in that area.
Yeah, no, was about my third year into being in Calexico, and I put my name in the hat for La Paz, Bolivia. And I figured, okay, I already know it. I've been down there working with the Snowcap operation. But now this was not in the jungle. This was up at the capital in La Paz, which
Mm-hmm.
I might add, no human being should live at that altitude. Um, you, you, they tell you to start popping Tylenol when you're about 20 minutes out from landing at La Paz. It's about 11,500 feet.
Wow.
And when you get off the plane, besides looking like you're walking off into, 500 years ago, this is what it looked like. Um, there's no oxygen up there, and you feel kind of sick to your stomach. You got a headache, and of course they're offering you coca to chew. And no,
Right.
DEA,
Right.
no coca. So they were telling you don't eat heavy, don't drink booze, that's always a
Tough for you.
challenge for us
Yeah,
DEA
probably.
guys.
Right. Yeah.
So, but you acclimate. So I was there for 4.5 years working out of the embassy in La Paz, and the country attaché was Don Ferrone, and I have to say, um, you know, who are we winning the drug war? Blah blah. We were winning it in Bolivia between us and the State Department, and they were also another agency that was intimately involved in the whole project of Snowcap, because Snowcap was not just to go out and seize drugs, destroy labs, destroy airstrips, but it was about teaching the locals, which is another reason why the Army Special Forces were down there.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to help the crop substitution to get off the ground, and it did. And the farmers realized to make money growing other crops, something other than coca. Of course, that all came to a screeching halt when we were, there was a new regime came in, and
Mm-hmm.
DEA and other agencies were booted out of the
Yeah.
country. That was
Yeah.
2008.
So from Bolivia back to San Diego area, and then you did a stint in Costa Rica with I love Gonzalo. Gonzalo, one of the guys you worked with there, Gonzalo Bado. He used to come up to LA eventually, occasionally, and Joe Evans connected me with him, and I'd kind of show him around LA, and what a great guy he was.
Hey,
Yeah. Could you speak to that? Just because here's a guy who's foreign law enforcement, and I think in the U.S. we do. There's obviously corruption issues all around the world, right? But there are people who are incredible investigators, incredible narcs, working for foreign governments in foreign countries, and I think he's kind of one such guy. Would you say?
absolutely. Gonzalo Balo Zuniga is known not just throughout Costa Rica, but throughout Central America and South America and the United States. Anybody that's ever had, like yourself, any interaction with him never forgets him. Um, you know, a lot of times we think, everybody, they all speak Spanish south of the border. It's all the same. It's not the same. Colombia's, night and day from Mexico. Every country is unique and different, which is a reason why you'll never see a common passport. Frequently, they don't like each other. But working in Costa Rica was just as transparent as working domestic, with our own people, really. And if they were truly your partner,
Right.
and the Costa Ricans, had the ability to wiretap. Wire intercepts were part of their law. Of course, it's, the judge was hands on during the entire process, but the cops, the federal cops we worked with, OIJ, Organismo de Investigación Judicial, was their FBI, while PCD was the DEA. So Joe Evans and I, who's another guy very well, We were partners, and he and I would work with OIJ, and we had a lot of success. And I mean, we were seizing multi-ton quantities of coke that were getting into Costa Rica, staging in Costa Rica, and moving up the Pan American Highway in sophisticated tractor trailers. Now we had a lot of luck.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
If
Gonzalo,
I can chime,
Yeah.
Mike, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say Gonzalo Balo. What he'll remember me by is the nickname he gave me. He called me Gato Negro, which is black cat, meaning I was unlucky. Because every time I would be invited to go watch his favorite soccer team play, they would lose. So he called me Black Cat and told me never to go to another soccer game with him. Sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, no, no. I was laughing at that. By the way, that's not a good moniker when you're talking about undercover operations to be called Black Cat. Um, don't want to be around you. But I think it's because in the manuscript, you really bring out the I'll just use the word friction as understatement between these different cultures, different countries, and like you said, oh, they all speak Spanish, so it's the same thing. Man, it couldn't be further from the truth. And I think it's one of the really important aspects of this manuscript about the multiple countries slash cultures when I'm talking regarding the drug cartels that worked together, but there was always massive suspicion, backbiting, politicking, and no one ever really trusted each other. But they did it, for a common cause. And that was to make money, of course. But it's really interesting, not only how this plays out between the different shot callers in these cartels, but of course how it affected your operations. It's very, very complicated and quite a balancing act. I thought it was fascinating.
To that note, Mark, I always remember this one story. We had an informant in LA, a Colombian informant, pretty good informant. And it came time that he got sentenced and he was doing his jail time in California state prison system. And some of the work he did was going to be disclosed, right? There was no way around it. So out of, I guess, courtesy or, humanity, we went and visited him in prison and told him, hey, these people are going to find out. They're going to find out that you were an informant, blah, blah, blah. And he broke down. Mm-hmm. And it was so hard to see him break down. And he was saying, they're going to kill me. You don't understand. And this is the reason why we went to talk to him, right? We thought at least face to face, we'll see him. And then we started talking about who the people were that were going to find out. And he stopped crying and he said, wait a minute. And they had a term for, this guy was Colombian, they had a term for Mexicans at that time, like a slang term, they would call them Mejias. And he said, man, you're speaking about the Mejias? The Mejias are going to know I cooperated? And we said, yeah. And he said, what about my people? And we said, no. And he had a big smile on his face. He said, oh, thank God. He goes, you had me so worried. He goes, I don't, it was pretty derogatory. He goes, I don't really care about them. As long as it's not my people, he goes, there's no issue. Thank you for telling me. And he was right back to life as normal. He just couldn't, that's the thing. And that's why there was, as you detail, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but you detail in the book that the distrust between, a lot of the times, almost most of the time, between, Colombian traffickers and Mexican traffickers, Mm-hmm. So, Mike, you go to Guadalajara, and I think it's really where the story, the book starts. And man, I see some traits that you developed in your leadership or in just how you worked now they were probably there before then, I don't know, but I saw how you worked in Guadalajara, and I want to kind of bring them up because they'll be lost on a lot of people, I think. And Mark, I want to hear what you think about this in terms of a sergeant, what a sergeant's role is. Now, keep in mind, Mike shows up to Guadalajara, he is called the RAC, the resident agent in charge. So he is the senior DEA person in the city of Guadalajara, a major city in Mexico. His first line supervisor or his direct supervisor is in Mexico City. How far away is that, Mike?
It's an hour flight, 5-hour drive.
Yeah, 5-hour drive away. So he's the man in Guadalajara. Now, having said that, he also was, and I don't know, what I want to hear, Mike, is did you choose this role or was it a necessity or kind of a combination of both? But you were also an investigator, along with being the head DEA guy there, the quote supervisor, the office head, you were also an investigator, and you took on case duties, and you were out on surveillances working the cases with the people in the office. Is that common in a spot like that? And explain kind of how you found yourself in that role.
So it's a 4 agent office and one rack, which was me, and an intelligence analyst. And then of course you have some admin people, and then you have some local hires, contract people who are local Mexicans in the area. And when I got there, of course, it was a night and day. Here I come from transparent Costa Rica back to Mexico, and I had flashbacks of my time in Calexico. So I was aware of the culture, and I had grown up along the Mexican border here in San Diego, and I spoke Spanish. But the Guadalajara was considered like the Medellin of Mexico.
Hmm.
All right,
Hmm.
it was where they all were. They all had lived there. They all had families there. They all had property there. It's the second largest city in Mexico. Although to look at it, you flying in, you didn't feel like you're in a big city. Unlike Monterrey, which was, very industrial, uh, business like, Guadalajara felt like you're out in the country, but it was a haven for kingpins. I mean, you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting a drug trafficker. In fact, where our housing was located, they were our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not
Hmm.
kidding you. They were. We lived in gated neighborhoods. I lived in an area called Puerto de Hierro, um, and that's like a steel gate, iron gate, and there were 3 or 4 old time trafficker families. We're talking about the Quinteros, like Caro Quintero, his family. Nacho Coronel was also part of the Sinaloa Federation at the time. All their families lived in there. And there's a lot of work. I got there shortly after I got there. There was a seizure, 9.6 tons of coke that was seized off the coast, pulled into the port, and we very quickly tied it to the Sinaloa cartel. At that time, they were called Sinaloa Federation. We figured out who brokered the deal and who it was meant to go to. It was meant to go to Mayo Zambada and Nacho Coronel. Nacho Coronel ran the Plaza. Plaza is a term that is used by the crooks and the cops to describe the area of control. Um, a 4-man office, we had a jurisdiction of a responsibility of 4 or 5 different states. So you're in Guadalajara, which is like, you know, the Medellin of Mexico, and you're still responsible for 4 other states. So I had to roll up my sleeves and get involved. So everybody was partnered, right? And I had 4 really good agents working for me. Um, so I partnered with one of the agents. He's in the story, Jimmy Martinez, and we focused on certain counterparts together. And other guys were responsible for work in and I'm talking about chiefs of police in 4 different cities that were surrounding us: Guadalajara, Zapopan, Tlaquepaque, and Tonalá, and then other states. And of course, the port of the seaport, the busiest seaport in the country, was Manzanillo, Colima. Was, again, a short drive, but that was a very busy area for a lot of coke coming in the country. So I didn't have the luxury to sit back and sign reports.
Hmm.
Had to get involved. And our priority, at least mine was as the boss, was yeah, we're in Mexico and it is corrupt. And I already knew that it was not the person, it was the system. And so I told everybody, I said, you're here in Mexico. You came down here for a reason. It's a good place to be. Um, we're an elephant country. That used to be a common term used in Miami during the Tom Cash's era, during the cocaine cowboy era of the 80s. But in Mexico, we were an elephant country. Um, So I said, let's all go out and make friends with counterparts. When you have counterparts that become close to you, and but you're playing poker with them, you're you're trying to figure out what's going on in your area of responsibility. You're not going to figure that out by hiding in the office and staying away from the corrupt counterparts. The closer they are to you, they're going to let it be known what's going on, whether it's, you know, whether it's a competitor,
Mhm.
somebody that they're looking at going after, or somebody they're protecting. You're going to get information from various counterparts, and you're going to find out what the truth is. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, because not everybody's going to tell you um, transparently what they're doing. You're going to have to figure that out. But the more people you have talking to you, the more you're going to learn. And so it was not just developing counterpart sources of information. It was also reaching out to the local community and talking to everybody from the hotel managers to the guys that sell the beer. Um, we made a lot of friends, and before you knew it, we were able to size up the situation to know who was running the plaza. In this case, it was Nacho Coronel, but they were all there. We had Arturo Beltran Leyva, all the guys that made up the Sinaloa cartel
Mhm.
were there operating with Nacho Coronel's blessing. And then there was another cartel known as the Millennial Cartel, run by the Valencias. The Valencias today are the Mencho and his CJNG. They're what developed from the Valencia cartel. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but the original question was it normal?
Hmm.
In Guadalajara, I couldn't sit back and not do anything. So I had to be
Yeah.
an investigator.
And you're really not all over the place, because I was going to ask you, as we get closer to you transferring out of Mexico to Houston, and the
Right.
story of Junior starting, I was going to ask you what the general landscape in Mexico was like, who was
Mhm.
in control, what the various. I got to ask you one question though. In your role, did you ever meet Enaro Garcia Luna?
Yes. Yeah, I
So,
did.
as people, Mark, I think you'll remember, he was the Secretary of Public Security, I think was a title in Mexico at one point,
Yes.
arrested or charged by the U.S. government, DEA case, arrested in Miami. He had left Mexico, was living in Miami or Southern Florida anyway, convicted at jury trial. So went to trial in New York, was convicted. And I bring that up because I heard you say something a minute ago. You said, maybe they'll talk about a competitor or whatever. I met him once at what was called a mini IDEC, uh, Drug Enforcement Commanders, International Drug Enforcement Commanders. And I was working at SOD, which is kind of a information clearinghouse or special operations division. And I went to Tegucigalpa, uh, Honduras, to take part in this mini IDEC, and he was there. And it's interesting that people told me basically, like, hey, don't really talk to him about Sinaloa cartel stuff. And this is in
Interesting.
2007, probably, I don't know what that is, like 13. I don't know when he was arrested. I don't remember it, but it was in the last, what, 5, 7 years, probably
Yeah, I think it was. I want to say it was
19.
2019.
Okay. So
Yeah.
anyway, even at that
Yeah.
time, agents like you who had the same mindset you had, they knew this guy was, but they didn't just hide from him. They just knew, like, I'm going to give an exaggerated example of how it was explained to me, right? Way exaggerated. But he would come and say, "What do you guys have on the Sinaloa cartel?" And the DEA guys would say, "Man, we don't have too much. What do you have on them?" "Oh, nothing, but we're really looking for it." And then the DEA guy would say, "But we're working the Golf Cartel." "Oh, the Golf Cartel? I have a lot of information on them. Let's." And you could find a place where you have common interest. Yes, this guy is compromised, but which team he's playing for. You just have to accept it, and you have to go after the other team with him. And then you have your other guy who's on the other side playing the other way, and that's your guy for Sinaloa cartel information. So I don't know how accurate that description was, Mike. I never worked in Mexico, but it was interesting to hear that and to hear you kind of allude to something like that, a minute ago.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Exactly what it was. In fact, the big thing was, okay, so I get there in the summer of 2001. I had gotten there 6 months after Chapo escaped and basically walked out of jail in January. And it's still a mystery as to when all that was arranged, how far back it goes. I think went back quite a while back because Arturo Beltran Leyva, or the Beltran Leyva brothers, they're cousins to Chapo. They maintained his operations while he was sitting in jail. And there were rumors that he was coming and going as he pleased. He basically ran the prison, which was right there in outskirts of Guadalajara. So listen, the benefit that I received getting close to several different counterparts, and I mean the local, state, and federal level, the local feds were not part of the new professionalized police force that Genaro Garcia Luna formed. He was put in charge of creating the new, kind of like, of course, tongue in cheek, the new untouchables, and they called them the professionalized federal force in Mexico. It was Agencia Federal de Investigación, so a federal investigative agency patterned after the FBI with like DEA responsibilities. They worked everything, but these guys were subjected to polygraph exams, and they pushed the old guard aside because they were the corrupt ones, and they started hiring and polygraphing these college educated kids. Well, of course they're going to pass polygraphs. They hadn't done anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, everybody was plotting the concept. The concept was the formation, and it came from the example that was set in Colombia, the SIU, Sensitive Investigation Unit, which meant they were all vetted. But in Mexico's case, they were not all vetted. If you don't vet the higher upper echelons, then it's not a vetted program. Because guess what? We were working with the minions who were, like Bill said, collecting in our information and sending it up, up the top of the pyramid. A lot was going up at first to the top of the pyramid. Nothing was coming back down. So at least in Guadalajara, I know other offices handle things differently. In Guadalajara, we stopped working with the AFI guys, or we would basically give them, like nothing leads to see what they would do with it.
Right.
And we'd work with other agencies. Again, we did not have police powers. We do not have police powers. Heck, we don't even have diplomatic immunity down there. We carried black passport, but we did not enjoy diplomatic immunity. We had something called limited consular immunity, which meant if we were caught in a situation, if we got into an accident, killed somebody, or got caught with a gun, whatever, we could legitimately go to jail, and the U.S. would have to negotiate a release. But what was the environment that we determined? After a short while, we were told by our Mexican counterparts, not of the vetted unit, but the old guard, they said, they would laugh. They would say, "Ha, you guys are working with Genaro Garcia Luna? Yeah, oh, good luck with that." Everybody knew he was corrupt.
Right.
But like Bill said, you have no option. Mexico gives the counterpart to you, and your mandate is to work with them. So, we had some very effective leadership in Mexico that could work and play poker with them, but not drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak. And so that was the key. And that's why I loved working in Mexico, because every day you wake up and you go, okay, I'm going to play poker. So, I hope I don't lose too much. But so the landscape, when I got there in summer of 2001, Sinaloa was in control. Now, you all know about the Guadalajara cartel. They're the forefathers. You have Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca, Carrillo, and then you have Caro Quintero, Rafael Caro Quintero. They were the trio that formed the first real cartel that actually relocated from Sinaloa to Guadalajara. From that cartel, um, they built kind of a concept of a consortium. What Miguel, he was the brainchild. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was the one who wanted to create lieutenants that he could send out to the various corners of Mexico and run things on behalf of him. And, and when Camarena was killed, that was the beginning of the end of their concept or their control, their cartel. So the Guadalajara cartel was dismantled by the late 80s. By 89, when Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was the last pin that dropped, that gave way to the Sinaloa Federation. I'll name the principal characters. El Azul, Juan Esparragosa Moreno, Ignacio, a.k.a. Nacho Coronel Villarreal, the Beltran Leyva brothers, Chapo Guzman, and then you had an affiliate organization, which was the Valencia family run by Armando Valencia Cornelio. He ran the Valencias. That was the Valencia organization that was based in Michoacan, a nearby state, and moved over to Guadalajara and started working out of the Guadalajara Plaza. So we were looking at all of them. It was one, I want to say, evening over tequilas that we learned there was another group we had never heard of. And they referred to them, the counterparts referred to them as Los Güeros. Güero means kind of like a gringo. You look like a gringo. Light skinned, gringo like features. It could be red hair or blonde hair, but light eyes. But you got the nickname Güero. We learned there's a story to it, but we eventually learned who they were. We learned their identifications, which we determined that it was the Olivera family, Rodriguez Olivera, with their two paternal and maternal last names. And then we determined that they were a group of siblings that was completely operating off of DEA's radar. And when I say operating off of DEA's radar, these guys were slewing tons of coke up to New York and all over God's green acre. They were working with Nacho's permission and under his umbrella. But they were very much a part of that Sinaloa Federation that I talked about. So once we identified them, we made them a priority target. That's where this story begins in 2002, when we identified them.
So Mike, you get to Houston, and I think there's a time limit for foreign assignments within, I guess, not just DEA, but State Department, I guess. You rotate out of there, you get to Houston, and what I think is two kind of significant things that I think you brought with you to Houston. The first is, as I already mentioned, you had been a, quote, supervisor, but you had been a guy that partnered with an agent and, worked cases with the agents. And I think that was significant going into Houston. And the second thing is you had 20 years experience as a DEA agent. And Mark, I don't know, in CHP, like what is the average amount of time someone has before they become a sergeant if they choose to be, to go the supervisory route?
It's a good question. I'm not sure what the actual average is. There is one, of course, don't know what it is. But my guess would probably be 6 or 7 years would be the average time before someone promotes to sergeant. Again, just my guess from being there 30 years. For me, I didn't promote until I had 13 years in the job. And because I liked doing what I did. I liked pushing a black and white up and down the freeway and chasing bad guys. And I was kind of talked into promoting, and 3 tests later, I actually finally made it. But it's, still a joke. But It's very interesting listening to you, Mike, because going back to your very beginning, really in the Navy, you enjoyed investigations. You actually enjoyed doing that work, and becoming a supervisor. If you like doing that work, the investigation, or you in your capacity, or my capacity, actually like driving. In other words, you like doing what you signed up to do. Once you promote, it's very, very difficult to let that go. It's like, "No, I didn't, whatever, especially if you're talking to it like I was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but what you did, I think reading this book, you did a great job of a balancing act because you kind of kept your hand in both worlds because you were signing off reports and you're doing all the supervisory stuff. At the same time, you were doing that really in the field type of operations, and the things that your colleagues, your subordinates, probably didn't have time to do, and that was about building those relationships. Boy, that come back to serve you well when you went to Houston. Like Bill alluded to earlier. So I want to keep my comments short because there's so much to talk about. But I was really impressed with that the way you wrote that in the book, described how you performed. By the way, there's one more thing I want to say here because I read, and it's not the only book about the cartels. And of course, being around Bill, being friends with Bill for so long, learning about this, I am always so impressed about the ability to keep things straight in this world. Because again, we talked about it earlier, where you have one side playing against the other side, but at the same time playing with that side. And then in comes law enforcement that's trying to work with both of these sides. And like you said, playing a poker game. And I won't say it seems to be as much art as it is procedure, but there's a lot of art and there's a lot of reading people that come into play here in order to make things work as well as you guys have and continue to do. So I just find it very, very impressive. I'll stop right there to give you more time to get to the book.
Yeah, so this is where the story starts, and the reason I asked Mark about the time to become a sergeant, whatever Mark thinks, in ballpark 6-7 years, whatever. In DEA, I don't know what it is now. I mean, maybe 10 years, 8 years, even 10 years, 8 years, 12 years, maybe. So here's a guy who had extensive work overseas. He has 20 years experience, and he's becoming the supervisor of a domestic group. That's an incredible resource for that team. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's a unique situation where you just don't see that a lot in DEA or really in any law enforcement. And I think that's one of the things that set this team up for the success that they had. So one thing we are not going to discuss, and I should have said this at the beginning, even before we started recording, guys, is the very ending of the book. I don't want to discuss the very ending of the book because it's powerful. And I want everyone to read this book, and I want everyone's feeling, right? I want the feeling they have when they read the ending of the book to be organic, and I want it to be their own because it's going to be very different from person to person. And I'll just leave it at that. So we won't discuss the end of the book. You got to go out and get it. It's called Junior, Son of the Gulf Cartel. But the story starts, Mike, with you in Houston, a new GS. You get a tip from your old partner in Guadalajara, and there's a high-level trafficker that's bringing his daughter to Houston to have some hopefully life-saving surgery. Sochi, is that how the name of the daughter would be pronounced?
Yes. Jimena.
And I'm sorry?
Yeah. Jimena.
Yeah.
Jimena.
And the trafficker's name is Raul Valladares. He's a son of a pretty high-level Gulf Cartel trafficker. So you get this information, and immediately you kind of make what I would say is a bold call, Mike. And that call is, we're going to go out and flip this guy and make a run at this guy. And I think a lot of times DEA is successful because there's not that much micromanaging. And I always jokingly call it supervision. Yeah. Like I talk about the first group I was in, and I said the reason we were successful is because we really had no supervision. We did a lot of, and when I say stupid stuff, I don't mean stuff that was unsafe. I want to make that clear. But we did a lot of stuff that people would say that's never going to work. And if there had been really close supervision, we probably would have been prevented from doing it. And yeah, most of the time it didn't work, but occasionally it did work, and there was incredible results.
Bill,
So
I would say unorthodox would be a great word.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just goes to a lot of times, I guess what I'm saying is you don't know what's not possible. And the one thing you don't need as a new DEA agent, like a lot of those agents were in your group, you don't need someone telling you that'll never work. Right. We're not going to do that, etc. And you didn't do that. You made the decision to make a run at this guy. You had no arrest warrant. He could have told you screw off, and that would have been the end of it. What was your thought process, Mike, and what caused you to take that shot?
Well, part of the tip was that he had worked with, in some capacity, with the group Los Güeros, and I didn't know necessarily in what capacity or detail. I didn't have that much detail other than he was tied to the brothers in some way. There was another informant involved running around in Mexico at the time. They gave us the tip, where the tip originated, and we knew what his function was. He was a broker. He was a Colombian broker, representing both the Colombians and Mexicans, the kingpins, and he's the one that provided a tip. I think he provided the tip kind of just as what he thought would be getting pressure off his back because he wasn't producing what we expected him to produce. So he told us about his associate in Houston, and what he thought we were going to do was follow him around, take photographs. And I asked the agent, Jimmy in this case, I said, give me some background, as much background as you can. So we did. And we knew that he was up for, in Houston, the medical center, the children's center, trying to get some life-saving, assistance. And we tracked him down. Made sure we separated him from his wife, and then approached him in a fashion that, where he would have to make a decision. And as much as I'd like to give myself some credit for that, or, all the credit, I can't. It was an uncomfortable and internal conflict that I was experiencing as we approached this guy while his child was in the process of potentially dying. So, but we are DEA agents, and this guy, if he was half the individual that we thought he might be, it was worth it. So we convinced him to cooperate. And I have to say that his cooperation led to one of DEA's biggest, most successful, unsung operations that eventually grew to involve multiple offices and multiple countries. And that guy opened for us so many doors that, he just lit the keg, and we were off to the races. Part of my aggressive approach to the whole thing has to do with the people that I had worked with, not only in DEA, but both professionally and socially. I was always of the mindset, if you don't ask, you don't receive. If you don't take a chance, if you don't get up to the plate and swing the bat, you are definitely going to strike out. So I had a lot of good mentoring, working with guys like you, Bill, your sweet mate, Keith Bishop. He was my partner in Houston. That made all the difference in the world for how successful this operation became. And it was not, as you read the book, it was not a one-man show.
No,
it was a team,
for sure. Yeah,
and multiple officers.
And I think one of the things that makes the story so enjoyable for me, and Mark and I have spoken about this, is the development of the characters, that you describe. And as Mark said, like the behind the scenes, regular, kind of living as a cop. You feel like a cop when you read this book. Mark, when you're reading this part of the book, right? Junior begins to cooperate, and they're doing these debriefings in the hotel in Houston. And there's this scene where he has the wet washcloth on his forehead. He's laying down on the sofa. This informant is just physically drained from detailing his life of crime. And Mark, do you remember the number they came up with how much coke he moved?
Oh, I forget the number of tons. It was, hang on a second. Uh, it was several hundred tons, if I remember correctly.
47 tons.
47
47
tons.
tons.
It was. Oh, go ahead. Finish
No,
your
I was going to
thought.
say, like, what do you think? What's your thought when you're reading that and you're thinking, man, this guy is now cooperating and he's moved 47 tons of cocaine.
It's funny. It's almost like you're reading my mind right now, because I can't remember the actual number, but I said several hundred, but 47 tons.
Yeah, it was large.
It was
You
large.
realize that.
And what I was thinking about, Bill, before you even went there, was his influence on the drug the drug trade. Period. And again, we're talking primarily, of course, the United States, but he also had influence in Europe as well, and in Asia to a lesser extent, which kind of opened my eyes. But what I was thinking about when I was reading this book, Mike, and then Bill just hit it on the head for me here, was as you're working with this informant and you're starting to get these massive returns of investment, your time and your trust. And then you alluded to it somewhat in the book, but I want to ask you now, organically, was there ever a point, and then because again, you have such success with this guy. He is a gold mine, like you said a second ago, and I'm putting my own words there.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever a point where you thought you were going too far out on the limb as far as trust and transparency with him, because you had to give some kind of transparency in order to get a return? And I talked about this earlier. In other words, where there's this kind of this balancing act between kind of procedure, protocol, experience, and art. In other words, we have to deal with this. I'm dealing with this personality. How far can we go? How much can we give? Did you ever feel that you were kind of getting too far out in front of your skis because you're getting so much a return on the investment?
No, man, that's a very good question, Mark. Very good question. But the answer to that is no. Why? Because the moment he flipped, our mission was to get him committed to the team.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, because in my experience dealing with informants and defendants, they're going to look at you and sell you a story, and your nature is going to be to want to believe it.
Yeah.
But he could have just picked up and left and gone back to Mexico and put his wife in charge. But we had to put him in a position where he was compromised. We had to compromise him with the very cartel members that that he grew up with, basically. Now, he is the son of a guy that rose to the top. At a short period of time, his father, Raul Valladares, and another partner by the name of Oscar Malherbe, they ran the Golf Cartel after Juan Garcia Abrego in 1996 was extradited to the United States. There was a void. And it wasn't immediate that Ociel Cardenas Guillen that came in and took over. There was a period of a couple, maybe even a few years, where there was a struggle. And this guy's dad was in charge of the cartel. So he grew up part of the Golf Cartel. He truly was a son of the Golf Cartel. So we had to make it clear to him, you can't go sideways. You can't turn back. We got him on the phone, consensual calls. He started interacting with the other bad guys. And
explain what that is for folks, Mike. The consensual
consensual
calls,
calls.
why you do it. Yeah, the why you do it and what you're doing.
Okay, so a consensual call is he gives us permission to record his conversations with bad guys. Now, the bad guys can be unwitting, and they were. But he gives us permission to record him, trying to get to a point where they can speak and, talk about drug debts, drug trafficking ventures, etc., past, current, future. And that those are overt acts that we can use to develop our investigation. So right from the get-go, we get him on the phone consensually. Why? Because not only do we want him committed, because now he realizes, oh shit, I've already been undercover working for the U.S. government, and double crossing my partners. I'm kind of stuck. And I also may have mentioned at one point in time, I said, look, we're new to you, but just be aware if you decide to go, change your mind about this whole thing, they're probably going to know you're an informant anyway.
Mhm.
So, of course, that's kind of a nasty, uh, 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 thing to do, but it's the reality. The reality is he was a drug trafficker. Nobody, forced him to be a drug trafficker. Yes. Was it in his environment? Yes. But he chose that world and he was deep, deep into it. And we quickly found out when you made mention of the 47 tons, that was our goal, was to flush all of it out of him. I want to know every single kilo you sent to this country. Okay. Because that's the only way the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to give you permission to continue to work with us. And he did. And
Now,
so,
go ahead. Go ahead.
no, so by the time he unburdened himself with that very last kilo, he had an Excedrin headache. I mean, he was popping Tylenol like they were Skittles. And it was a scene, in the hotel room where he literally was, had a cold compress on his head and he broke down. He realized, shit, this is what I've done. I'm going to hell, or, you guys are not going to want to work with me after all. And the bottom line was, that's what we do.
Yeah.
That's what
Don't get
we
me
do.
wrong. I was sold. Again, I said you alluded to, probably more than alluded. You articulated what you said, pretty well in the book, and I was sold as well. I didn't know what's going to happen. I didn't know if he was going to become unreliable or things like that. So I was sold on him as well, and for the reasons that you just said a second ago. I won't say the names. I want Bill to to lead this, but we do find out that there's someone else involved here, another player in the cartel, who's undercover and who's not quite as reliable, and actually ends up causing some friction with you and another office. And again, I may be a little bit cryptic here because I don't want to give anything away until Bill you talk about it. But it's Lamona I'm talking about here.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good time to talk about that, because the reality is, Mike, the tip came from him. Right? The tip came from this Colombian informant who you alluded to, the guy not really producing, and which is, that's actually more the common informant situation, at least in my experience. The guy's generally more like Lamona, trying to give as little as possible, as opposed to someone who, like Junior, that's just makes a decision to be all in, and he's really all in. So can you talk about just the experience with Lamona and the friction with the Miami office, and how this whole thing took place? It's probably the time to talk about that, because I know Mark even had some interesting thoughts on that.
Okay, so Lamona came to us because he was popped in Miami behind an investigation they were working on. They didn't know that they had their hands on the tail of a big tiger. We had to send an agent up there. As the guy that I partner with, Jimmy, went up there and helped them basically assess his potential value, because he was super connected on the Colombian side, but they didn't know in Miami how connected he was on the Mexican side. We determined he was very connected. Make a long story short, we eventually worked it out to bring him down to Mexico and tried to get us right up next to the cartel kingpins that he had been working with for years. And he was plugged in all the way to the top. And he started back in the Medellin cartel, and then as things shifted from Medellin to Cali to North Valley AUC, he was all part of that game. And so we knew we had somebody special with him. The problem is, there was a loose leash. You asked about, did I ever feel uncomfortable with Junior? No, because we had a tight leash on him. We couldn't do that same thing with Lamona. We had to have a bit of trust, because we didn't have a tight leash. He came down to Mexico and he was in the wind. The only thing that we could do was threaten him that, he would not be forgiven, that we would be after him. He'd eventually get caught. And I think he was also working off of beef to help out his brother who was in jail. Anyway,
Right.
he wasn't doing shit. Okay. And every time we would try to go in and rein him in with the guys from the domestic office. Now, DEA in foreign countries cannot be responsible alone for working a case that we're hoping to get to a domestic office. That has to be a joint venture. Okay. And they're jointly controlled sources, mutually controlled by the foreign office and the domestic office. So the Miami guys wanted to give him more leash. He's doing his thing. He's getting, he's afraid to be, he doesn't want to be compromised. It takes time. Well, when we got a hold of Junior started making headway in the investigation, and with the same traffickers that the Colombian Lamona was responsible and asked to do. And I think that is where things started to kind of get off track and rub. And that's where we started to experience some conflict with our fellow DEA agents. Now, I just want to say right here and now, they were nothing criminal. They're great guys. And I'm sure their hearts were in the right place. There's something else that I'd like us to talk about, and that is the system that is in place that puts pressure on agents like us to produce. And I think that's a huge factor I want to mention. That should not be ignored. But in any event, we got crosswise.
Yeah.
And my informant versus your informant, who's controlling the operation? By this time, the operation was picking up steam.
Right.
Because we were recording stuff with serious players, not just in a foreign realm in Mexico and Colombia, but domestically. We were starting to identify domestic cells that are operating at these guys at their behest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just to make it real clear to everyone, the Lamona, the Colombian informant, and Junior working in the same circles. Lamona not really producing, pressure gets put on him. He gives up Junior. He says Junior's going up to Houston, his child's sick, whatever the case. And like you said, not really thinking that there'd be a run made at him. Yeah, pictures, surveillance, no big deal. You sign up Junior as an informant. And I think that's kind of where the rub starts, because this Miami office feels like, hey, that tip should have come to them, right. Which, by the way, I disagree with. Came up in this system for over 30 years, just like you, Mike. The tip has to go to the city where the trafficker is, that's at least my opinion. Anyhow, that's kind of where I think things started to go sideways with Miami. And Mark, when you saw that, let's call it bureaucracy, get involved, and Mike talks about the system, which kind of facilitates that. And I want to hear from him on that. But what were your thoughts, Mark, as, a 30-year state government employee working in law enforcement when you see this?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. I certainly understand the geographic aspect of it. And again, it's because I am an outsider looking in here and not familiar like you guys are with the DEA culture. Although, Mike, again, you did do a good job of talking about the pressure, the expectations put on individual offices to meet certain thresholds, put it that way. And so that causes this competition. Well, if we give up information to our colleagues in Miami, that may diminish our ability to achieve, and so forth and so on. I guess there, in my mind, there may have been a way. Cause when I was reading this, so I'm watching what's going on in Miami, I'm watching what's going on in Houston, and now I see the wires getting crossed, and I think, man, I was guessing. I said, something bad's going to happen here. There's going to be a meltdown between these offices. Now, again, I say that not because I'm familiar with DEA culture, but I am familiar with bureaucratic culture. And I'm familiar, as retiring as a chief, I'm familiar with egos as well. I think, I read this and there seems like there is a mixture of procedure and ego in here. It's not one or the other. I think there's 100%. Both here. And I
Yeah.
think there may have been a way to handle it. And I want to be humble here. I'm not sure. I think there may have been a way to handle it here, through channels to give up enough information. Hey, listen, we're dealing with X, so and so here. We don't want to step on your toes. We want this to work. I'm not sure, but let's put it this way: I certainly saw this blow up coming, and boy, did it come bad. There were more F bombs dropped, even in the book here with the conversations, than I care to recall. But again,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not unique. It's not unique to the DEA. It's not unique to the California Highway Patrol. I've got friends and connections in LAPD with their different bureaus and things like this. It is common because people are trying to do the right thing and get things done, and they feel, God, if we bring in so and so, because I know that asshole over there, I know how he operates. I know he's going to F things up if he gets involved. And it's going to be bad, not just for us. It's going to be bad for the DEA's mission. In other words, your belief may or may not be correct, but that's your belief. It's an honest opinion. I'm trying to get the job done. Leave us alone. Let us do our job. It may or may not be the right call, but I think the hearts are usually in the right place. And sometimes the wires get crossed and communications break down. That's what we saw here. So I'm familiar with it. The nice thing is that people, read the book, things get fairly well, I think, resolved over a period of time, and people are on the same page. Not perfectly, but I think, as well as can be hoped.
Like I'll tell you, that never crossed my mind because when we got started, our relationship was perfectly fine.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
the whole thing was unintentional. The only thing that came to mind with me was, how are we going to find this guy and find him fast? I don't know where they were with the medical, situation. But let's get the hell out of the office and go over there and see if we can find him. I just assumed that we'd be able to kind of put all this together. I didn't see Humpty Dumpty, falling apart at all.
Right.
It wasn't until after it was said and done, it was like, what? Humpty Dumpty's broken. How are we going to put this back together? So we did try to put it back together at our end anyway.
And I think, by the way, I think there was good diplomacy on both sides and work together. But I will say this again, I was just jumping to conclusion. I was reading this because of my own experience from, my world. It did seem, though, that egos got in the way. And I will say this, because I don't have any dog in this fight, from Miami side. And it seemed like almost intentionally, they kind of gummed the works up because they were pissed. And to me, it seemed like they made things not go as smoothly as possible, at least for a while. That was my feeling about it.
That's That's an accurate assessment, Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, I think at the very least, trying to exert control, enforce control, and that has a negative effect on stuff. Hey, Mike, anything else to add just about you? You talked about the system. I don't know if you're alluding to like pressure for seizures, pressure for short-term gains as opposed to kind of the long-term success of an operation.
I think DEA, when we're in the academy, it's in a sanitized, environment. We're told to think out of the box, which we did. Bill explained how he was effective at doing that as well. We're taught that we could potentially bring, dry conspiracies and they'd be prosecuted. The environment, once we get out into the field, we work at the U.S. Attorney's Office and develop a dry conspiracy, meaning no dope, no money. But it's just not this. It's not the case. Mm-hmm. When you go out to the field, the reality is something much different. There is pressure to put powder on the table, so to speak. Mm-hmm. There's pressure with your immediate supervisor, with their supervisor, all the way to the SAC to produce what's called metrics, stats, because the world revolves around what you're doing. Miami, LA, San Diego, wherever you are. Maybe not so much overseas because you're not, but domestically, you're supposed to produce. And the U.S. Attorney's Office, whether you're having a bad, environment or a tough situation getting prosecutors to prosecute, that doesn't keep you from going out and doing job as an investigator and seizing dope, money, and bringing, the evidence to the table for the prosecutor. So there is a lot of pressure, and it takes a special leadership to say, whoa, let's let the leads go where they should. Okay, are we going to miss out a little bit? Yeah, we're going to miss out, but let's do the right thing for the right reason. Let me just throw this perspective that I didn't mention to you before, Bill, and it's really not in the book, but it's a thing. Now we're talking about Miami. The Miami's heyday was when the Medellin cartel was on fire. And even with the Cali cartel, Colombia was moving all their dope through the Caribbean corridor. And we had this thing called the cocaine cowboy era in the 80s, which caused us to form the Florida Task Force, et cetera, during the Reagan and Bush administration. That era passed. It went from the Caribbean to Mexico. And all of a sudden, Miami's going, where is all of our cocaine?
Right.
And so there's that pressure from the leadership to pull as much cocaine their way. And I'm saying cocaine, I'm talking about prosecutable cases. Their target rich environment started to kind of, disappear over time. And I think that's a huge factor in this story.
Yeah, you had one of the most successful offices in DEA. Miami was the highest profile office in DEA, at least in 92 when I started. And all of a sudden things changed. The traffickers, or I don't know, the business changed. Let's say that Atlanta actually became more of a trafficking hub than Miami. Drugs started running through Atlanta, cobwebs in Miami, and the boss is saying, hey, what happened to our numbers? What happened to our numbers? How come you guys aren't producing anymore? And I don't know that they specifically said that. I'm sure they had some recognition that that the trafficking was changing. But a lot of times they don't, hey, when you have resources or you want more resources, you have to use something to justify that. And here we have a huge office, one of the biggest offices in DEA, and people starting to question, like, why are there all these agents assigned there if there's not drugs going through that area anymore in a roundabout way? So, yes, there is pressure. There is pressure to kind of keep the legacy of Miami alive. And, I think that probably played a role in this. One story that we don't have time to talk about, but I got to mention it because people want to read the book just for this story, because nowadays we hear a lot about cartel influence in the United States, and I'm not going to get into my views on that. It's probably different than most, but also violence associated with cartels here in the U.S. One of the things that came out in Junior's debriefing was the jailbreak of his father. And when I say, like, this wasn't an escape, right, where a guy hid in a laundry basket like Chapo or something. This was a old-fashioned jailbreak in the 90s where they had a pretty well orchestrated plan, and they forcibly broke this cartel figure out of a United States, I guess a Texas jail, state jail. They forcibly broke this guy out of jail in Texas, smuggled him immediately back to Mexico. And like I said, I don't want to get into any details of it because it's a really cool story. And, think that this was going on 30 years ago, right? When we talk about all these, quote, new things happening here, man, they were forcibly breaking people out of a state jail in Texas in the 90s. So look for that story in the book. A couple other things, Mike, I want to touch on. And it kind of involves, let's say your travels with Junior. And I think it's important to talk about these three instances because it kind of shows the type of work DEA is doing, things that kind of happen in the drug world that people are not familiar with, that they look at it and they say, wait a minute, that's crazy. The first is a trip you took with him to New York. And the reason you guys went to New York, for the most part, was because of damaged kilos of cocaine. And I think people out there might think, wait a minute, there's a return policy, or, if goods are damaged, but, Mike, I think you'll agree, it causes some serious issues when you have some damaged drugs that somehow get through the supply chain. Then obviously the second thing that happened in New York, we'll get to that in a minute, or the second thing you learned of while in New York. But could you talk a bit about these damaged kilos and how something like that's usually addressed within a drug trafficking organization?
So kilos are there. It's not as sensitive to lose kilos as it is for money. Money causes a whole lot. That's a whole other level of pissed offness. But these kilos were sent up to New York, and they were removed from a larger stock of kilos that were being that were safeguarded in Mexico. So they were sent up without permission. When they got up there, they were transported in with limes. So it was perishable fruit that was the cover load. And what happened was the spillage and the juice leaked into some of the kilos and spoiled a good number of them. And so somebody was going to be held responsible. Now, Junior, being the broker and having the connection with the transporter, that was a transporter that worked for Junior. He was held responsible. So they were asked to fly up and get with the distributor in New York to resolve exactly how many kilos were damaged and what caused the damage. And then who is the blame for the kilos even being authorized to be moved up from the Mexican border to New York. So there are multiple issues, and they ultimately had to answer to the owner of the kilos, the guy where the kilos originated from in Colombia. He had a reason to be pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
So
money back guarantee, Mike, on that?
Basically,
for the end purchaser or the wholesaler in New York who took delivery of it. I mean, does he have to pay for those damaged kilos?
Not in this case. Why?
Right.
Because he had already moved tons of dope for these people, and
Right.
so
he had some credibility and trust with them, where he said, "Hey, this was messed up."
Yeah, bad things happen, but like I said, money, it's a different scenario, different situation. There's less forgiveness going on.
Hey, the other thing that happened when now you went to New York too. So this is you as a 14 now in a domestic group, really going on an operational trip. And what was talk about that? Because that's another thing you don't see too much in DEA domestically. You don't see first line supervisors traveling with their agents on an operational thing. Yes, if there's coordination meetings, the supervisor's there, or briefings to somebody, obviously the supervisor's there. But this was an operational trip, and you made the decision to go. Talk about that.
Thank you, Bill. And that leads me to want to go back to how the whole thing started, how I got involved to begin with. It's not normal, Mark, for a first line supervisor like me to get into the weeds on a case.
Right.
It's not normal. In this case, I had the background of the investigation. I spoke Spanish. I knew that it was only me that would be able to flip this guy, and convey enough background information to make him think that we had more on him than we actually did. And then because of that attachment with this informant, I didn't control him necessarily, but I maintained a constant communication because, like I said, there was always, to your question, there was always some reservation about him cutting the line and jumping back in the water. And I didn't want to risk that. But I also wanted to meet with the New York supervisor as well. So I went up there. I took an agent with me who was also intimately involved in the case. Our entire group was working the case, basically. So I went up there, and Junior met us up there. So I wanted Junior to meet with the bad guys and be debriefed beforehand by the New York agent. Eddie Piachata, phenomenal agent, helped really pull this all together with us. And so Eddie debriefed Junior with me, and then we sent him off to do the undercover meeting. And that undercover meeting opened up even more doors to the bigger operation that was going on between Mexico, the border, the Mexican border, and the distribution network in New York. It was huge. So that is why I went along really to meet with their supervisor and thank him for the cooperation, and then kind of you know oversee the uh, the operation as well from our end. But yeah,
Yeah, and I think so. So this is and Mark and everyone else, listening and watching here. This is the value of an informant like this. You can take him to different cities, and he can quote plug you into the connected organization in that city. So all of a sudden now you've taken him to New York, and yes, there was a pre-existing case in New York, but now you've kind of roped another investigation on a distribution cell in with this national effort. And, the premise being that when you take the case down, when you finally arrest everybody, you're doing it in all these different cities at the same time, and you're having the most influence. If that's not the case, they arrest somebody in New York, and guess what? They fly
Boom.
a guy. They fly a guy up from Houston. Everyone else runs away. They fly a guy up from Houston. He takes his spot, and it's business as usual. When you take them out in, hopefully multiple cities at the same time, it really does cripple an organization and causes significant problems. They have trouble recovering from that, and then when they're recovering, they generally use less experienced people, making it easier for law enforcement to infiltrate. Maybe there's an opportunity to introduce informants to take a more significant role because they're looking for people to fill these voids that the government created. So really, the government, when they do operations like this, can kind of then orchestrate what happens next in a lot of cases, which is super important. But
Hmm.
I want to get to the other thing that you learned on the trip to New York, and that was that Junior lost his daughter. Now, at this time, I don't know how long you'd been working with Junior, a number of months anyway. You've developed a relationship with him. He fancied himself as 007. That was kind of what he called himself. He seemed to be enjoying his role and developing a rapport with you and the agents. And Mark, I know you mentioned this to me, so I want to put you on the spot. How did you feel when this criminal, this Gulf Cartel criminal, lost his daughter?
Well, conflicted. And I told
Mm-hmm.
you, Bill, I said, I think I'm going to probably paraphrase myself, but I do the best I can to quote myself. I hated the fact that I was sympathetic to Junior.
mhm,
And it really all goes to how well, Mike, you wrote this book and really nailing down, I think, how much Junior really did want to right the wrongs that he
mhm.
had committed. That's the true feeling. I really believe that was his intention once the ball got rolling with
Yeah,
his relationship with you
yeah,
and the other agents. And so, um, and the reason I didn't want to feel sympathetic, because I still don't know, by the way, it's not in the book. It doesn't need to be in the book. I still don't know how many deaths, quite frankly, that he is responsible for, at least indirectly, by facilitating the trafficking of these drugs.
mhm,
Or I don't know if he was involved directly with any type of violent behavior. I don't know, but either way, there's still understanding that his activities resulted in the ruin of countless people around the world, their lives through drug addiction and probably drug overdoses. But having said that, it was very, very difficult not to have a sense of forgiveness, because I think legitimately he wanted to change his life. He wanted to change his life, and he wanted to right the wrongs. In other words, he felt guilty, I think, for what he had done. And this was his redemption by, having the blessing of meeting you. So there was some conflict there, which makes this one of the reasons it's such a fantastic read.
Yeah, and as I hear you say that, Mark, I almost think, yeah, this is a story of redemption. Really, that's what it is. And I set you up with that by saying, this Gulf Cartel criminal, making him sound really bad, which in fact he was, but he had taken the steps to turn his life around. And I felt the same way, man. I felt bad, obviously felt bad for him losing his daughter when, he was, kind of putting his family on the line and taking some significant chances to
Yeah.
do what he was doing. How about you guys, Mike? What was the feeling at that time?
Well, being a father, we were speechless.
Hmm.
We were speechless. And by that time, when I first met the guy, he was a drug trafficker. Um, you know, but shortly into that initial debriefing stage, he had a boyish charm about him, and a smile that was very disarming. And you weren't completely sucked in, but you were thinking, this guy's it's not a bad guy. If I didn't know he was a drug trafficker, I'd probably sit and have a conversation with him on a plane, you
Hmm.
know, or a beer at the bar or whatever. But after working with him and seeing how he engaged and fell into the role and wanted to be 007, and even said, I'd love to be a DEA agent. Can I be a DEA agent after all this?
Right.
The guy, he was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
He was a lot of fun, and we started out trust but verify, and then that leash that I told you about started getting looser and looser, and we realized the guy's not going anywhere. Now, when we found out that his daughter had passed away, it was crushing, and once again we felt that internal conflict.
Hmm.
You know, Here we are dragging this guy to New York, and his daughter's dead, and I didn't feel good.
Mm.
So he goes back to Mexico, and now we're giving him the space he needs. And at one point, we have to revert back to being DEA agents and go, is he coming back? And so, yeah, he eventually came back, and we put the put the train back on the track.
Yeah.
It was
That's a
tough.
tough one. Yeah. Um, let's talk about Panama. And I think in 2005, around Thanksgiving, he went to Panama, and I guess this was probably his first trip down there while talking to you, while working for you guys, and he hooked up uh, with Lee Nash and crew in Panama. And can you kind of just highlight the trafficking methods, because obviously in the news right now, and I don't want to get off on a tangent here because Mark will want to get off on a tangent with go fast boats in the Caribbean being blown up and everything. That's not the only trafficking method. Containerized freight, especially going through Panama, was and is a big way to traffic cocaine into the United States and even into Europe and around the world. Can you talk about that first trip that he took to Panama and kind of the coordination, and maybe contrast it with the assistance that you get in Mexico, or that you would see in Mexico? How the working, I guess what I'm trying to say is, can you kind of highlight the differences in the working environment for a DEA agent Panama as opposed to Mexico, and what they were able to do with this information um, when he came down there, when Junior went to Panama?
Perfect. Like Costa Rica, Panama has its own dynamic. Working with the Panamanians is, they are our bilateral partners. They're hooked at the hip with us. And Panama for DEA, foreign, has got to be one of the busiest offices that we have, bar none. Those guys are just humping it constantly. This case we brought down because the head of the office was a former partner of mine, Joe Evans, in Costa Rica. He had taken over the office. Lee Nash, I didn't know. Before this case, I met him. He was assigned to be the case agent to interact with us and with Junior. So Junior went down to meet and discuss upcoming plans to move several tons of coke. Why Panama? Panama is considered like a mini Colombia. Colombians feel very comfortable at home in Panama. That's a great place to wash money, to move bulk money. It's also a free trade zone, right? Huge free trade zone. So you have hundreds of companies that are used. Many of them are just fronts for moving coke. They're legitimate businesses doing legitimate business things, but the bulk of their focus is to camouflage coke in containers, and we're talking about 3 to 5,000 tons of coke in a container. And of course, there's a dynamic between Panama and the receiving port, seaport in Mexico. So skids have to be greased, so to speak. Monies have to be paid. Corrupt counterparts have to be on board to get these containers into port through the port inspection process and into a storage facility pending the next trek up to the Mexican U.S. Mexican border. Anyway, it's quite the process, and there are multiple people involved at every end. Junior was a broker like Lamona and was making money at every end, putting people together, putting the transport service on the table, and basically, putting his reputation on it, and to the point where if the loads were lost, he would be held responsible financially. And so, a lot of the other factor that's discussed in this book is lost loads. There were lost loads, and people were held responsible. And what would happen for not only brokers but transporters is they would become indentured servants to the kingpins. You lost my load, fucker. How are you going to pay it back? And that was through work. So, basically, transporters would have to transport for free.
Yeah, and in that trip, they identified Cumpea. What was the name of the company, Mike?
Cumepa.
Cumepa.
Yeah.
The Cumepa warehouse, and how much coke was eventually taken out of that warehouse?
Well, they were getting ready for a load that we were tracking, and they were pulling together close to 3,000 kilos in total.
Yep.
And one late evening, there was a theft at that warehouse, and 1,000 kilos were removed. So we ended up seizing 2,080 kilos that we were able to use as an overt act in our federal conspiracy charges.
Right. Amazing.
And Mike, let me chime in with Panama, and you're talking about free trade zone, and so you have all of these front companies, like I said, the legitimate companies, but of course they're using that legitimacy for cover, for the trafficking, for the movement of all this cocaine. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. This is a memory. I think Romero was he the prime mover in Panama? Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
So that's going back to the value of Junior, is that he wasn't just, and I say just in quotes, kind of the broker, but he also had all of these very, very close working relationships with people who were behind the facilitation, the movement, the transportation. I mean, it was kind of a double or triple whammy to, this is why he was such a target of the DEA, why it was so valuable, because he had these branches into really kind of every aspect, from Colombia through Panama, through the Mexico, Texas border.
Yeah.
He had kind of all of the bases covered, and through this one contact, he really was a gold mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he was once we realized what his function was, we learned a lot of things that we had, at least I in DEA, didn't know about. And so I had a good amount of years, on the job, and I was learning things about how they really worked at the cartel level. One thing is, a cartel could vary from being like a corporate entity with, an army, to being just a family of brothers, making enough money to kind of hire their own people, and as opposed to sharing loads with other organizations and other kingpins. But Junior was like Lamona. He was, he was the center of it all. And they trusted him, at his peak time in his career. He was trusted by the Colombians, trusted by the Mexicans, and then put all the facilitators, like you said, together in action.
And by the way, that's why, and I wasn't good at it. That was what I was getting at when I went down that road, is that he had a great relationship with Colombia. He had a great relationship with Mexico, which maybe it's not rare, but I guess it was unusual and very, very valuable. This goes back to the beginning of our conversation about the conflicts between the various cultures, Colombians and Mexicans, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
And to have someone like Romero who, and of course Junior, but someone like Romero who was able to work almost seamlessly with both of these countries and cultures and cartels, so valuable. And of course they got to him really through Junior. I mean, when I read that, I mean, you talk about just winning the lottery. It's a fantastic story.
Yeah, and again, we're just highlighting a
Yes.
couple brief snippets from this book. You have to go out and get the book, Junior, Son of the Gulf Cartel. It's probably the to me the most interesting narco book that I've read, just because it really digs into the business. And one more little story from the book before we wrap up, Mike, and that is a few months after the thing to Panama, maybe early 2006, I think, moving money from Atlanta back to Texas, doing a money pickup.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about, because I think when people see that, I think it was a $2 million pickup in Atlanta, and people say, oh my God, the government laundered $2 million for the drug cartel. Why in the world would they do that? Can you talk about the incredible benefits that come from these undercover money laundering investigations and what you can do that you cannot do on the drug side?
Yes. Okay. So unlike drugs, money brings the kingpins out of their reclusive hiding places. They want to be close to the money. So if we were in a position to put money in the hands of a kingpin, then that was golden. It was golden opportunity. And in this case, Junior being the broker, and he had a business partner who had another business partner based in Atlanta. Talking about Atlanta being a core location for a lot of these traffickers, like the Beltran Leyva organization. There was money sitting in Atlanta from drug sales. That money needed to come back to Mexico anyway. And so Junior was asked if he could facilitate bringing the money back from Atlanta into Mexico and putting it in the hands of the drug traffickers. And Junior, being 007, thinking on his feet, said, yeah, I can do it. And came up with a crazy scheme of using a transportation mode. I think in this case, armored truck. He just pulled it out of his ass.
Right.
And by the way, he didn't forget to take his commission off the top, correct?
Right.
Well, and
right.
by the way, and that wasn't for him. That was for
him.
authenticity. So
Yeah.
So people receiving the money, it will look like a legitimate trafficking of the money.
And of course, that money, the commission,
right,
went into the coffers,
correct,
our U.S. government coffers.
Yeah.
And but we had a special exemption from the Attorney General's office to do that type of operation, with the goal of identifying the ultimate recipients of that money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that money made its way from Atlanta to the border. We identified the people on the border. And of course, like many cases in DEA, it connected to another major investigation. Mm-hmm. And we were able to identify the people in that investigation that were closely working for the Zetas. Mm-hmm. That's a whole nother aspect of this story, the book. Probably not the opportunity to get into in this point, but they were also front and center in this story, because they came to fruition and control of the Golf Cartel in the late 90s. And they were a deadly bunch of characters.
Almost like a story where, a group hires another group for muscle, and then that muscle group ends up taking over the people that hired them and running the show. What were they, Gaffies originally? Gaffies or Special Forces? A lot of them were Special Forces, Mexican Army people, and also I think they recruited people from some other Central American country, special forces or
Yeah,
whatever. I don't know,
Guatemala, the Caibiles.
there you go, the Cabiles, exactly. So these are guys that had some serious military training. Yeah, and took them over to be kind of their muscle arm and exert pressure on other trafficking groups, et cetera, et cetera. The description of the undercover deal to pick up that money in Atlanta is fascinating. People will love that. It's so real world. Just the way the exchange actually takes place is so authentic and real because it was, and I loved it. Also, here's another key thing about money. When you're working on the drug side of a case, you really can't let, I mean, I shouldn't even say it really can't. You can't let those drugs, quote, walk, right? You can't let
Right.
you can't take possession of these drugs and then put them back out to the public and say, oh, yeah, I guess people are going to die, people are going to get addicted, whatever, who cares? We got to further our case. That doesn't happen, to be clear.
Right.
On the money side, with an attorney general exemption, which is not easy to get. It's a very extensive process. The Department of Justice has to sign off. Obviously, different layers in the department have to sign off on it, give you authority to do it. But you can pick up money from people and deliver money from people and let it go and kind of identify both sides of the transaction. You can identify communication instruments, get up on phones, electronic intercepts. You can do so much with that type of case that it's a really important investigative tool, and it was only natural that you guys used it here. So let's talk about wrapping up, man. As I already said, we're not going to talk about what happens to Junior. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just think people need to read it for themselves and have their own reaction to his path, to where life takes him, his decisions he makes, etc. But Mike, can you talk about just the aftermath from the takedown side of the case, or how did this case wrap up, and just in a nutshell, prosecutions, what did you accomplish, and what did you kick yourself that you still left on the table after this investigation was done?
Junior did his job. Junior laid the path for us to climb the ladder, the kingpin ladder, so to speak. He identified enough key players for us to go after to flip as secondary informants, other informants who could not only corroborate his stuff, but open doors to allow us to get as high and as far reaching as possible. In this case, we did. We were able to go after Ramiro, the transporter, and convince him to cooperate. Mm-hmm. And there were a few others that we were able to go after and get them to cooperate. When it was all said and done, and we were able to put all the offices involved, Miami, New York, Houston, the Mexican border, Panama, Colombia, Guatemala, when everybody came together and decided we have enough to go after these targeted kingpins, and there were multiple kingpins. We realized, okay, let's schedule this thing and take it down. And when I say it was unsung, one of DEA's unsung successes, is because there were not a whole lot of headlines about it. Mm-hmm. Even within DEA, a lot of people knew about the operation called Band of Brothers. Those names come from the office working with SOD, Special Operations Division, and it's tongue in cheek in this particular case because the Güeros were brothers. Right. The real Band of Brothers, I might say, became the DEA family with Junior that worked this case. That truly became a Band of Brothers.
Interesting.
Right. But did we leave something off the table? We always leave. There were people that got into the wind, cooperators, when it was time for their sentencing, time for them to go to jail.
Right.
They walked. They went back to Mexico.
Right.
I don't want to obviously say too much about it, but there was a tragic thing that occurred with another cooperating defendant and his family. And I get into that in the epilogue. It was horrendous. But shit happens in the narco world,
Yeah.
and Bill
It's a
knows
dangerous business.
in his
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
he's witnessed a good amount of it. But um, you know, there are some people still floating around out there with a warrant.
Yeah.
Keith, my partner with DEA, moved on. He went to Afghanistan with a promotion with SOD. I moved back to Mexico City as an SOD liaison coordinator, and the case was still going on in my absence because we had a very effective team working in Houston, closely with the guys in New York. We were able to grab, indict, apprehend, get extradited, and sentence kingpins between Colombia, Central America, primarily Guatemala, and Mexico. And of course, we dismantled a number of distribution cells and transportation networks on the domestic side because of a bunch of judicial wire intercepts that we were
Right.
conducting. So we had a significant impact, in my opinion.
Right. The book is Junior, Son of the Golf Cartel. Incredible book. Go out and get it. I mean, we can't do it justice talking about it for 2 hours. We could talk about it for 8 hours. It's incredible. As I said, one of the best narco stories I've ever read, and a lot of that is due to the development of the characters involved and how you feel a part of the story. Mike, what's next for you? Because the chief will be happy to hear that this isn't the only book you've written. You got another one in the
excellent.
pipeline. Yeah.
Oh, quickly, Junior is scheduled to be released sometime this month, December.
Okay.
I don't have the exact dates, but check social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and um, LinkedIn. The next book is the true life story, a 37-year career of a corrupt comandante working within the corrupt system. He's a Mexican comandante I met early in my career, and then encountered him again when I went to Guadalajara. He has a fascinating story. I refer to him as the Forrest Gump of Mexican Federal Judicial Police because he was involved in the 70s, the 80s, 90s. He retired in 2014. He lived the entire
Yeah.
narco evolution era, and he
From marijuana to methamphetamine right there.
all of it,
Wow.
Yeah.
all of it, and he interacted face to face with kingpins, some of whom are mentioned in the Junior story. The guy's fascinating. Unfortunately, he passed a couple months ago, so he was only aware of the story based on his what he had to share, but he's not going to be around to see the finished product. Um, that is a fascinating story, and it was fun to write as well. That'll be out next year.
Can't wait.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
Fantastic.
Mike, thanks for the time, man. I know we took up over 2 hours talking about this. I can't say enough about the book. It's going to be great. It will someday, in my opinion, be made into some type of
Yes.
screen thing just because of the characters involved and how well you develop them. Someone's gonna jump on that. So I look forward to that. Thank you, Mike. All the best to you. And we will, Anthony and Vince, will pop out something when the book actually releases on our social media so people can connect the dots and pick it up. A fascinating story. Thanks for the great discussion, guys, and we'll see you next time on Truth Nation.
Thank you, Bill, Mark, Anthony, Vince. Take care.